Hello, everyone. Welcome to the NAFSA Diversity and Internationalization Summit. My name is Lenitra Berger, and I'm the NAFSA President and Chair of the Board of Directors. And on behalf of the Board of Directors, I would like to thank the NAFSA staff for doing such difficult work and pulling together this fantastic summit for us today, as well as the NAFSA leadership in having the vision to organize this summit today. I'm so thrilled that so many people have signed up, that this event is full, and that we have a very full program today with experts in the fields of international education and diversity, equity, and inclusion who have taken the time to come today and share with you many of the trials and tribulations that they've experienced on their campuses in uniting these two groups. So I'm going to offer you a thought of mine that you can agree or disagree with, but I want you to think about it as we go through the summit this afternoon. I think that the work that we're doing here in diversity and international education is the future of the field and is the most important work that we can be doing in international education. We can't afford anymore for these two separate fields to be siloed. We need to be working together. And you're going to hear today some expert examples on how different campuses have achieved a much greater collaboration. We know that what affects the local affects the global and vice versa, and that the principle of mutual understanding applies next door and across the border. So I'm going to give you 3 questions that I want you to think about as you're going through the seminars and the breakout rooms today, and talk about them and debate them. These are things that I think about on a daily basis in my work with students, in my work with faculty and with administrators in advancing international education, as well as achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. So question 1 is international education going to continue to be a finishing school for the elite, or will it become a global classroom for resistance, liberation, and sustainability? Question 2, will we run away from or towards some of the paradoxes that define the international order? And question 3, how do we as leaders take responsibility for and accept the risks of becoming catalysts for social change? As many of you know, I have been promoting the NAFSA social justice book, Social Justice in International Education. It's a book that I edited that came out last year. And there are several authors of different chapters of the book who are participating today and on this Zoom. This is something that's inherent to who I am as an international educator, and is the same for many of the people who are participating today. We've seen both through our work and also firsthand how international education transforms lives, transforms marginalized communities, helps lift people out of oppression, and we're working together to end underrepresentation. So I encourage you to check that book out, to share it with your colleagues, and to talk with many of the chapter authors who are participating in this session today. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to do your work today in this summit with a sense of purpose and urgency that's going to set the tone for how you work for the rest of 2022 and hopefully beyond. I want you to ask each other some very hard questions, and I want you to connect with people in today's session who you may not know, introduce yourselves and agree to connect after today. And most importantly, I want you to keep this conversation going. This is not a one-off event. This is meant for us to have an ongoing conversation about the importance of this work. And I'm hoping that I'll see many of you at the annual conference in Denver, where we can continue to have these discussions in person. So I'm going to leave you with a thought something that I've been thinking about in my own work, in my own research, because I think it's really relevant to the topic of the day. I'm someone who's really interested in Black diplomats And last semester, I taught Intro to African American Studies at George Mason University, and we were talking about Black internationalism, which was a fun topic and something that students didn't really know a lot about. And we were talking about the Black scholar, diplomat, and peace negotiator Ralph Bunche, who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1963. And in his speech accepting the award, he said, quote, "As an American and a Negro, I cannot avoid reminding my fellow Americans that all of us who have a sense of justice and fair play must contribute to the solution of a problem on our own doorstep, which is perhaps more complex and baffling even than the Palestine problem." So he was talking about the race relations in the United States and comparing it to his work as a diplomat negotiating peace in Israel-Palestine. And for someone like Bunche as a scholar to be able to reflect on these two deeply complex issues and to understand how these complexities could cross borders, I think is symbolic of the kind of work that we're trying to do. We're looking to make sure that access to international education is broadened so that we can find young people like Ralph Bunche was at one point and invite them into the field and invite them to excel and to contribute their knowledge and their expertise. So this is, to me, central to what we need to be doing in our work on a daily basis. Your collective work as senior international officers, chief diversity officers, and all those who serve in international education or diversity offices ensures that that international education's benefits and its possibilities are available to every person who seeks access to them through higher education. So everything we do as NAFSANs should be done with the goal of expanding the table and ensuring that everyone has a seat. So I thank you so much for coming to this session today. I look forward to a very productive day, and I'm so pleased that you're here to participate in this event today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenitra, for those important reflections and comments, and even questions for us to consider. I think it really set a good tone for today, and I look forward to furthering this conversation. My name is Dale LaFleur, and I'm the Senior Director for Academic Affairs and Internationalization at NAFSA. Today's event is the culmination of the vision and work of several people that I now have the pleasure to introduce to you. These leaders have engaged in international and strategic work related to diversity and internationalization on their respective campuses. So first, from Florida International University, we have El Peña Hudson, the Vice Provost of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Senior Vice President for the Division of Human Resources, and Dr. Hilary Landorf, Executive Director of Global Learning Initiatives and Associate Professor in the School of Education and Human Development. Next, from Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, we have Dr. Hilary Kahn, Associate Vice Chancellor for International Affairs at IUPUI and Associate Vice President for International Affairs at Indiana University. And Dr. Khalila Shabazz, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And finally, from the University of California, Davis, we have Dr. Joanna Regulska, Vice Provost and Dean of Global Affairs and Professor of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies, and Dr. Renetta Toll, Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. These panelists will share insights, and they'll help us to understand what motivates them and drives them to engage in this important work. I also want to recognize the member of NAFSA's International Education Leadership Knowledge Community, as well as several other expert leaders who will serve as discussion leads in the breakout rooms following the panel discussion. Their participation helps to diversify the voices you will hear and learn from throughout this program. And finally, I want to introduce Dr. Dawn Michelle Whitehead, the Vice President of the Office of Global Citizenship for Campus, Community, and Careers at the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Her office focuses on advancing curricular and co-curricular initiatives and practices that advance equitable participation in global learning, integrative learning, and community-based learning for all students in preparation for life, work, and citizenship. And at this time, I would like to invite Dawn to share some reflections to help ground us in our discussion today.
Thank you very much, Dale. As Dale mentioned, I'd like to just share a few framing comments to think about the brief history of the work in both diversity, equity, inclusion, and internationalization or international education, looking at the areas of alignment and difference, and speak a bit about what has taken place historically in these areas. I often like to begin with some sort of musical reference, so please indulge me. If you think about the words of a song from the Broadway musical Hadestown, performed beautifully by Andre de Shields, he says, "It's an old song. It's a tale from way back when." And that's exactly what this conversation actually is. Although the conversation has been rightly elevated over the past year or year and a half, many people have been engaged in conversations about the intersection between diversity, equity, and inclusion and global learning or internationalization for many, many years in many different parts of the world. And in my few minutes, I just want to share a little bit about the alignment in the literature and efforts to collaborate across these intersections and make a very quick case for the urgency of this alignment. Now, to start off, I also, in addition to the song, I have to acknowledge my research partner, Hilary Landorf, who you'll hear from a little bit later. And we have been focusing on some of these issues for a while. So you will likely hear her voice in some of my comments, especially as I discuss the alignment of the literature. One of the things that it's really important to think about and consider are the roots of diversity, equity, and inclusion in multicultural education. And when we're thinking about how there is connectivity and what has occurred in higher education, many of us go back and look at the work of James Banks, who many know as the father of multicultural education. And when you look at the work that Banks has done, you look at four overlapping phases of multicultural education. One, ethnic studies. Two, multi-ethnic education. Three, when he started looking at expanding and bringing in other groups such as women, people who identify as LGBTQ+, the disabled, and seeking to have their voices included in educational experiences. And then fourth, you got to the phase of a more comparative approach, one that actually examines these connections among race, ethnicity, gender, class, and connections among societies. And while multicultural education developed from this need to address identity and inclusion, international education, on the other hand, developed out of the need for institutions to address the growing interconnectedness of people, of trends, and systems around the world. International education, as most folks know on at this event, really started in the post-World War II era with the birth of area studies, peace studies, and international relations. However, since the 1980s, it has expanded broadly across disciplines, functions of the university, and activities at the university. Of course, this has included an expansion to reflect international mobility and the exchange of students, the exchange of scholars, more collaborative research, and looking at the recruitment of international students as well, and of course, the internationalization of the curriculum and the co-curriculum. And despite these differences in history and the development, how they emerged, there's fruitful common ground when we look at the natural intersections. And I just want to share a few scholars who have explored these intersections over the years. Of course, in Learning Across Cultures in 1994, Janet and Milton Bennett explored the similarities and differences between multiculturalism and international education in one of their chapters. That's become a classic. In 1995, global educator Mary Merrifield published a study on the ways in which teacher educators in the US and Canada were bridging the differences between global education and multicultural education, both in pedagogy and in the curriculum. And then, of course, many of you are familiar with the work of Canadian political philosopher Will Kimlicka, who came out with Multicultural Citizenship, a book in which he examined ethnic and racial diversity within societies and among societies focus on individual rights and group rights. So as I said, it's an old song. And what we're doing now is elevating this conversation and making sure that more people on our campuses and at our institutions are touched by it. Many of you and some of you may have been participants in this work. We have seen examples, some institutions that have worked very hard to bring folks together very intentionally. Many people give a nod or a tip of the cap, if you will, to the American Council on Education and their initiative At Home in the World, which in the early 2000s brought together chief diversity officers and senior international officers with the support of their presidents or provosts or chancellors to explore the areas of similarity, difference, and overlap with the goal of increased collaboration. There have also been campuses where joint offices have been created, where there is a senior level person who is responsible for both of these areas. And of course, over the last 10 years, there have been increased presentations at conferences, there's been increased writing. If you look at the work at AACNU that we've done, both at our global and in our diversity work, if you look at AIEA, if you look at diversity abroad, and of course, I'm so glad Lenitra mentioned Social Justice and International Education as a recent publication that highlights the need to look at this work more broadly. Finally, there is and has been an increased urgency for this collaboration and alignment. With the global racial reckoning, most dimensions of higher education have been revisited, and most institutions are rethinking their practices in ways to reflect today's society. And this has certainly affected both international education and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have to ask ourselves, are we preparing students for the nuance and complexity of anti-Blackness that they encounter in global experiences? Are we helping students, including those that are not traveling outside the country? Are they aware of the colonial legacies and places that they're studying and traveling? Are they aware of the contemporary implications? Are they aware of the implications in their own local communities as they engage with partners and peers? And are they seeing these connections? Finally, President Ronald Daniels of Johns Hopkins University has talked about the increasing diversity in higher education and the urgent need for students to live, speak, and learn to collaborate across difference. And he often uses the term purposeful pluralism to describe his goals for bringing together students from diverse backgrounds in conversation to solve problems and to work together. And ultimately, that's what we need to do in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, and international education. We need to come together, to work together, to make sure that we are doing it to model for our students, but to wholly prepare our students for today's realities. With that framing, I'll turn it over to Gail so we can hear from our panelists. Dale?
Yeah, thank you, Don. This context is really important for us to keep in mind. Both Lenitra's comments and your comments really help to provide a nice framework as we open the discussion with the panelists. So the first question for the panelists, we'd like to start with some framing from each of your institutions to understand the process that you went through to cultivate the relationship across offices and to get to these intersections. So let's start with Florida International University. Hillary and Alpenye, could you tell us how the relationship between your offices evolved into your current relationship?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I want to start by saying that this is the first national discussion I know of in our field that brings both international education administrators and diversity officers to the same table. And I want to give a big thanks to NAFSA for developing this event, recruiting and coordinating with all the panelists and the group facilitators and handling all the logistics to get to where we are today, which is a live discussion on really one of the most important topics in higher education. So to respond to your question about our process of integration, it began after having done some serious reflection and introspection with my staff. As the executive director of the Office of Global Learning Initiatives at FIU, my purview focuses on global learning in the curriculum and the co-curriculum, the teaching and learning aspects of internationalization. FIU is a very large public university with a very diverse student population. 68% of our student population self-identify as Hispanic, 12% Black or African American, 9% white, and a little over 2% Asian. Also relevant to this question, there's a 2-course global learning graduation requirements for all undergraduates, which I'll explain later. The point here is that going into the summer of 2020, as a university, we knew we were already providing global learning that was inclusive of all students and that accounts for diversity. But because global learning is a lifelong process and we all pride ourselves in being global learners, during the upheaval and the heightened awareness about systemic racism in the summer of that year, my staff committed to critical reflection of our own actions and practices. And we found that where we were falling short was in equity in global learning, making sure that equity issues are being addressed in global learning courses and co-curricular activities throughout our students' education. So we created this multi-pronged plan to focus on equity. And it consists of several strategies. And the first was to meet up with the vice provost of a newly created Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And this is to talk to El Panier about ways to collaborate. And that's just what I did. EK, do you want to continue?
Absolutely. So thank you. And thank you all so much for this platform and this opportunity to have this conversation, this important conversation. I want to say it like this: work brought us together, passion brought us together, a desire to take action brought us together. And I had seen Hillary around, Dr. Landorf around campus, and we'd always exchanged pleasantries. But however, the summer of 2020 brought the work of the Equity Action Initiative, which was a charge by the president, for us to look at ourselves as a university. So it's interesting that, as Hillary just said, they were doing that introspection in their unit, and then the entire university made a decision to invest the time and the resources to look at ourselves. So, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, global learning, those aren't new to FIU, but it was an instance where we really stopped to evaluate and self-reflect on what our own positioning was. And this work created, the Equity Action Initiative created tentacles across the university where we welcomed and invited individuals to come and bring and contribute to the work. And Hillary reached out to me. I like to say it like this: she extended an olive branch to say, here is what we're doing. Let's talk about how our efforts are intersecting. Let's talk about how we can work smarter together. And we had already extended an invitation to do that. So it was a welcome invitation to have conversations around what the university's initiatives were and how they aligned with what the unit was speaking about doing. So that's how our relationship came into being.
Thank you. Very interesting. I'm curious to know what happened at IUPUI. Hillary and Kalila, can you share your story?
Sure. Well, good afternoon. And I can resonate so much with many of the comments that Dawn shared initially, as well as our friends at FIU. I think what's interesting, and I'll share a little different for IUPUI, is one, structurally. So DEI is its own division, academic affairs is its own, student affairs is its own, and international affairs is its own. So, you know, being on the campus for over 20 years, there wasn't a lot of collaboration across the units. And for me personally, really it started with that journey for me being introspective as well, saying, okay, wait a minute, I don't know as much as I should know about global affairs. And I saw this come to light with working with students. So I work with many of our domestically diverse students and student organizations. And as we, you know, were having our student organizations running, we also started getting requests from international students who wanted a campus experience similar to domestically diverse students from a student organization standpoint. And I realized just how separate they were, just how different they operated, just how little they understood about each other. And so that really launched me into how can I be intentional about enhancing my own learning about, internationalization and global affairs, et cetera. And so I participated in a global leadership program that was offered by the Diversity Abroad organization. And I centered my entire project around the gap between bridging the gap between international students and domestically diverse students. And I brought that project back to our campus and shared it with some of the international affairs colleagues. And, it was like, oh, we're going to move. And there wasn't a lot that happened initially. And then Hillary came. And so when Hillary came, I don't know how we saw each other, met each other, but I remember that we met, and I took my project plan to her office with me and said, here's what I've been thinking. And that is really the start of what has become a great relationship. So I'll turn it over to you, Hillary, for additional info.
That's great. Yes. So where we are today, after that, sort of trajectory, is currently we've been focusing actually on a partnership between our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office, the International Affairs Office, as well as the Institute for Engaged Learning, and our Center for Teaching and Learning. And that's been a very, very productive conversation. And these conversations started a couple years ago, but they're really picking up speed. And actually what we're doing right now is the four of us are working with our Forum Council. The Forum Council at IUPUI is all the leaders involved in teaching and learning, basically. It's all the heads of units that somehow intersect with teaching, with students, with classrooms, and as well with faculty. And so we've been working with them on intersecting with equity frameworks and understanding, a variety of different models and so on. I'm only going to speak about one of them here, but that is the intercultural praxis model that we've actually been extensively working with, is Catherine Sorrell's model. And it's a really great model, actually, if you're not familiar with it. Like any equity framework, it allows us to think about the complementarity of local and global diversity. And that's exactly what we're really focusing on in our 1 year professional development engagement with the Forum Council, with all these leaders on campus. During the first semester, we've been focusing specifically on introducing them to some of the equity frameworks, particularly focusing on the intercultural praxis model. And again, for those of you who don't know Sorrell's work, one of the reasons that it's so powerful is that it really allows you to think about equity and racial justice and social justice from an ethical lens, an intercultural lens, and a global and local lens. It's very grounded in reflection. It focuses on issues of action and power, which is a really important piece that I think we need to see more of in global learning. But it also talks about who's benefiting from the conversation and whose voices are being heard. It's a very powerful model. I won't, perhaps we can talk more about it in our breakout rooms, but the goal now is that we're trying to scale up this work. We started with the Forum Council, and now we're trying to prepare them so that they can take it back to their respective units and really start to implement a more cohesive curricular. This is very much focused on teaching and learning in this regard, cohesion of global and local diversity.
Thank you. Also, Joanna and Renata, I'd like to hear your story at UC Davis.
Thank you very much, Dale, and good morning from California to all. It's really a pleasure to be here. I want to thank you, Dale, and also all of the organizers. Thank you to Dawn. I'm happy to be here with my colleague, Joanna. I also, in the Old Baptist tradition, want to recognize your president, Lenitra Berger, and so it's good to be here. To start, first of all, I'm on Putland lands. UC Davis is on Putland lands, which is the land of the Yocha-Dihi, Catchell-Dihi, and Quetzal-Dihi tribes of the Wintu Nation. And so Joanna's story and my story is a bit personalized. So I came to UC Davis as the inaugural Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in summer of 2019. And during that summer, I was invited to a reception at our Chancellor's residence for the Mandela Washington Fellowship scholars of the UC, and it's a scholarship and fellowship program for African leaders. And so it was there that I had a chance to meet Joanna Rogulska. And if anyone knows Joanna, you know that she is a wonderful, gregarious leader, full of energy. And so it was just a pleasure to have one of the first people that I met on campus to have her welcome me so warmly. I think the interesting thing about Joanna and about personality and personal story that fits in here is what happened next. Joanna started to ask me if I had what I needed, how was I settling in, what could she do to help? We ended up finding out that I was going to be moving and purchasing a home not too far from where she lived. She said, let me find out when your closing date is, and we are going to have a celebration dinner for you at my house. And I'm going to invite other people for that dinner. And so that old-fashioned hospitality, that breaking down of barriers, started from the very beginning within a few weeks of my arrival on campus. And it really set the stage for the relationship after that. Joanna found out that I had a deep interest in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. She invited me to go with her and others to Rockefeller Center headquarters in New York a couple of weeks later for the University Global Impact. And I had learned about the Sustainable Development Goals as an engineer at the World Engineering Education Forum in Cartagena, Colombia. So I actually learned about them in Spanish before I learned about them in English. But just that coming together over, again, personal kinds of things, over a love for the SDGs and what it represented and how we could work together to address the world's challenges, and bringing that back then to campus. So sort of leapfrogging and then coming back to look at the challenges on campus to see how we could work together. During the George Floyd murder, Joanna was working with her staff and working very hard to try to make sure that they were having a full understanding of the meaning of the responsibility and so forth. And she would have these teas, she called them teas with Joanna, where she would have teas with members of the international community. And she invited me to one of those. By this time it was COVID, and so we were online, but just to have that open-ended opportunity to have people ask questions without fear, to do a calling in as opposed to calling out. There were no bad or wrong questions during that time, and we agreed upon those sort of as community guidelines ahead of time. And so that was a wonderful way to start. And then we also have people who work in our offices. She has an associate vice provost, well, several, but one of them who particularly worked with one of my associate vice chancellors on building bridges, on their strategic plan for global affairs and global learning for all, and on our D&I strategic vision. And there's much more. So let me turn it over to Joanna herself, and then she can take it from here. Joanna.
Thank you. Thank you, Renata. You have been incredible partner, and it truly makes such a big difference. And I really want to underscore how the personal relationship and friendships create a tone when you find somebody with a similar commitment and passion. The world is open and we can really move the mountains. So there is this personal part which so often we don't talk about, and it's really critical. But I also wanted to point out that Renata has done numbers of things within the DEI to allow to bring us together. And one of those initiatives was the DEI strategic investment, where individual units began pulling together of what they are doing to bring DEI into the focus. And of course, from global affairs perspective, this was the moment where global affairs could actually present in terms of activities, programs, thinking, how we can create and how we can shape that conversation. So the interesting part was that we actually have done quite a bit, but it was also this power of naming that we are including DI or we are including international. So I think that is a part of the everyday strategy as we move along. So this is not prescribed ahead of time and plan. This is the commitment that we translate. And let me tell you one other thing, and I'll stop. Very often at the meetings, Renata will support global affairs. I will speak for DEI because the difference is that it's a different voice. It's my voice speaking about DI, and it's Renata's voice speaking about global learning and global education and global engagement. And that makes a difference for everybody in the room to hear this coming from different directions. And I'll stop here because probably I use all my time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank all of you for sharing the evolution of the partnerships and showing the different ways to develop them, from the personal encounters to the professional. I think that was helpful for all of us. But I have to ask about challenges. And I wonder if you could tell us about some of the key challenges that you have faced. Could be early on, could be during the pandemic. But what were some of the challenges that you faced, and how have you overcome those challenges? And this time we'll start with IUPUI, so Kalila and Hillary, and then we'll go to UC Davis.
Sure, thanks. So I actually think a lot of the challenges are just involving perception of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, as well as global learning, the misunderstanding of the scale of that work, one being global, one being very local, and trying to undo that and create a whole new category, a whole new understanding of our work as shared. And the truth is, Kalila and I can recognize the power of our partnership. Forum Council is starting to, others are, but it's almost stops. There's a point where there's a wall where we just keep getting bounced back, and we just have to we have to be persistent. We have to keep working at it, and really, as you said, I agree completely with Joanna, naming it, calling it something, focusing on a model, an equity framework, the intercultural praxis model, whatever it might be. And so that when people are thinking about issues that relate to DEI, perhaps, they also automatically start to think about what that means globally, and vice versa. And I think that is happening bit by bit. The other challenge, quickly, and I'll just say, is the organizational structure. Kalila already spoke a bit to that. It can be a disadvantage, but I think the issue is it can be an advantage. It really demonstrates why we need this partnership. We need to work together because we have different voices and we have different sort of stakeholders that we work with. So it's best that we pair up on this work. Kalila, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think you covered it. I will just add that piece of that Joanna spoke about the shared passion, because I can honestly say that when I was so excited about my project, that I came back from New Zealand and had this whole plan on this partnership that we could have, it wasn't quite received. So I think that piece of really working through who really is engaged in and committed to doing this work collaboratively, and having that honest conversation, because we all represent great relationships, but we also know that there's some places that doesn't exist, and the reality of having to sort of break down those barriers. It just so happened that for our campus, Hillary came in as the new leader who was completely opposite and very receptive to bridging that gap. And so I think that piece about, trying to form relationships with your counterpart and really, really nurturing that and trying to make that connect with each other around that shared passion is so important.
Thank you both. That was helpful. Next, we'll go back to UC Davis. So Joanna and Renetta, I'm not sure who will take the lead on this one. Okay, Joanna, thank you.
I will start a little bit. I want to actually go back down to what you said. And this is maybe not a challenge, but I would see this as a sort of a critical step that we all should acknowledge. So the fact of, for some, it could be a challenge. And that is to get to know each other, not only personally, but understand the roots and the history of our respective fields. The areas of inquiry which have subsequently really impacted how these two areas has been shaped, how they became to being, and then what strategies and tools we use and how we use them and under what circumstances we employ them, because there are differences. And these differences as a result of that shape us, these two different offices, different cultures of the offices. And there are these other dimensions. DI, a lot of the work of DI has really roots in the domestic struggles of individual nation states. So there is a silo, but international is trying to come across the boundaries, across the borders. So there is an important nuance, because what it tells us that we need to learn far more about different cultures. We need to understand the notion of racism in different countries, in different places. And then how do we translate that into our institutions? So that will be one of the sort of programmatic challenge that we need to really think about it. And then another one is, then again, I'm drawing on your inspiration, but how do we prepare our students? Not only students that are going abroad, right? And they often don't have that critical knowledge, but also what do we do for our international students? And how often do we discuss the notion of the racism as a global phenomenon and yet a local, deeply embedded phenomenon, right? So I think those are the programmatic challenges and challenges of the kind of intellectual and practical conversations that we need to have across the units, because it's not enough that one unit talks about it. We have to take it abroad within the institution, abroad through the institutional units, to really talk about it in a more deeper way, because the strategies have to be aligned with each other. It's not about DEI strategy or strategy of global learning and international education, right? So I think that dialogue still need to have more time, more space, and have to take a place. And Renata, I'm sure you have plenty to add.
Not much, Joanna, and I know we don't have a lot of time. You covered so many points. I would just say that this manifests, for example, in needing a lot of time and energy to absorb more. So Joanna and I, our first joint statement was actually about incidents in Hong Kong and protests in Hong Kong that were happening in 2019. And so Joanna and I, as well as the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the time, came together to write a brief statement just in support of our principles of community, just recognizing that there were protests on campus. And there have been other things where we've had to jointly work together to support communities. Learning, of course, taking into account what's happening with students from Afghanistan and so forth. And so there's a growth and a need to continue to grow and learn, I think, on all sides. And we have continued to do that together, sharing resources, even in our academic spaces, in our academic departments, sharing some of those things across borders. And that has been very helpful.
Thank you so much, both of you. And now we'll go to FIU. So EK and Hillary.
Okay, I think you've all said it all. Thank you, both UC Davis and IU. So I'm going to go to I think a small challenge, a structural challenge, but it is a challenge. Probably more than just FIU faces this challenge. It's a question in such a large university and even if you're not in a large university, you have many priorities within DEI. Do we address the DEI global learning challenges separately, or do we address them as part of the DEI general mandate? And I want to give just a quick example. So DEI already has a council at FIU. Should we establish a specific international ed DEI task force comprised of these representatives from IE and from DEI? Or do we have this task force carve out its own common agenda? Or do we have the issues between IE and DEI be part of a general DEI mandate? So do we do this separately? Or do we do this together? EK, what do you think on this?
Yeah, thank you. When you talk about the challenges, I think when we think about the fact that prior to, in our instance, prior to there being a division of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we had areas that were doing amazing things throughout the university, but they were smaller scaled, right? And I feel that if we keep them within the umbrella of DEI generally, the resources are there, the strength of endorsement in terms of leadership presence is there, and there's more cover. There's more cover for its longevity. There's more cover for its sustainability, rather than it being an outlandish outsider, if you will. And here's an example. When we established the work, we were asked, should there be a DEI strategic plan? And that sounds great. And it's not to say that there shouldn't be, but my thinking was, if there's a DEI strategic plan that's separated from the university strategic plan and the cuts are coming, I think they're going to cut what's outside of the plan initially, right? So I think the same principle applies if we're talking about having the strength of support to global learning, to international education, to all these areas. I think that it lends itself to having greater cover, if you will, when you talk about challenges and things that could come as forces against the work. I also want to say that another challenge, and we all started out with this, about how close our relationships are, and that's a gift. It can also be detrimental if we don't establish a foundation for this work that lives beyond us and our relations, right? And I'm telling you, I couldn't have a better partner in this work than Hillary, and it's a delight daily. And we collaborate, we think through, we strategize on the work, but we're also reminded that we're doing work not just for today, but work that's going to be transformational and sustainable beyond our presence. And then the last thing, and I think Joanne had mentioned it earlier, sometimes, a lot of times, the impetus for our work is associated with a trauma, or in this case, our division was established following the death of George Floyd. And it's a dangerous thing, for society to be motivated by Black death or any trauma to catalyze change, because that means that trauma is going to be required for it to be given the attention that it needs. So I think that those are the types of things that challenge our work. So it's important that we elevate and create sustainable transformation in all of our spaces, collaboratively, in a way that will live beyond ourselves.
Thank you all. Those were very great examples for us to think about. And I really appreciate the emphasis on how you've utilized your relationships with each other to overcome the challenges that you were facing. And as we all know, oftentimes challenges lead to new opportunities you may have foreseen or not foreseen. And I would like each of you to reflect a little bit on what you consider some of your greatest opportunities in this space. So let's start with UC Davis with Joanna and Renata.
Well, I'll start and then Renata will lead. So you heard already that sustainable development goals and our commitment to larger global challenges were actually at the bedrock of how we work together. And that indeed became our mantra and our connection. So what's happened over the last couple of years, we work on sustainable development goals through a variety of avenues. We committed ourselves about now a year and a half ago, and we published in the fall first voluntary university review about sustainable development goals. 3 offices, because we are actually committed to social justice, racial justice, and environmental justice. So the 3 Office of Sustainability, Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Global Affairs came together to map university against all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I'm going to put the link later, but we did this 180 pages report. The key was to really bring those different dimensions in the teaching, in the research, in the service, and actually in the operation of our community. So we did, that was collaborative work. We spent plenty of time together, learning about each other, thinking about use of language, the emphasis, how we put things together, how we emphasize, how we reflect. But also we have developed numbers of other things that actually led to this voluntary university review. We are doing grants together, grants for Sustainable Development Goal. We just awarded a new group of grants. One of the issues we realized was actually how the DEI is being included, and I will leave that for Renata to talk about it. We've done forum for the campus. We have interns. So there's numbers of different ways that we continue to collaborate. We are also doing things abroad, and I think that's sort of a stage in development of our relationship. We're working together with Mexican institution. We're working together on mentoring program for Asia Pacific Rim women leaders. So there was an internal stage, and now it's sort of also expanding into external stage for both of our institutions. And I'm going to let Renata to talk more about how we're moving forward.
Thank you, Joanna. Just really quickly, I think, and this I think might connect to Alpanye's point about sort of beyond the relationships and what do you do to operationalize things. Because we have the SDGs as our framework, automatically SDG 5 on gender equity, SDG 10 on reducing inequalities, they're already codified in the SDGs themselves. And so we know that global affairs is going to be looking at that whole thing, but my DEI group also is becoming very steeped in the SDGs. And because we did the voluntary university review, we also know who faculty are across campus who are doing work in these various SDGs by one or more of the 17. And so we have been able to work with faculty on different pieces and different projects throughout campus. This turns out to be very efficient because we're able to move very quickly to different kinds of solutions, or if there are questions, or even when things sort of break out and there's chaos, we know how to bring a little bit of order to it by going to the VAR, seeing who our resources are, et cetera. And we found that that helps us to keep a handle on some of the campus climate kinds of issues, and it works very well.
Thank you. Let's go to FIU next. Hillary and Alpenier. What opportunities do you have?
Good. So as you said, Dale, often our greatest challenges also represent our greatest opportunities. So to answer, I want to refer to a research project Dawn Whitehead and I are doing at AAC&U. Over the past year, we're able to conduct a series of focus groups with diverse students. And I want to bring in the student perspective here from 6 universities in the United States to find out students' perceptions of DEI and global learning, the connections they see between the two ideas, and the suggestions they have for integration between them. And one of our initial findings show that students know when the real work is being done and they know when it's not being done. In fact, I learned this new term from students in the context of our research. It's called a cultural tax that BIPOC students at some universities feel they're undergoing, bearing the burden of carrying DEI efforts on their backs on their own. They say that they're being asked to do a lot more to foster relationships with communities of color on and off campus. And they say that administrators, here I quote, burning out these student leaders of color. So this is a real challenge that students are voicing. And then the question is, how do we use this challenge as an opportunity? And I'm going to turn it to EK to answer that.
Thank you. It's interesting because we talked earlier about this being the first time a gathering of this nature has happened on a national scale. And to me, that means we need to really take opportunity to build our bench, right? We talked about the tentacles of this work going across our campuses and certainly within our two areas, but building a bench that again talks about, creates sustainability, that a bench that goes deeper, right? Because it's still new, it's new for all of us, especially coming together. So giving depth to the work, institutionalizing it through institutional goals. We were able to establish DEI goals for the university that do include elements of the SDGs, and that's a wonderful thing. And then we recently released a university-wide belonging survey. And again, highlighting the voices of the students because it included faculty, staff, and students. Now, I can't share those results because we're still filtering through them, but a lot of open-ended questions there and open-ended statements rather that give us opportunity to meet people in the community where they are, to hear their voices and create and craft initiatives around what they're desiring to see and feel and hear at our university. So there's so much opportunity, especially now, and we're riding the wave, we're holding on, and we're exchanging with each other because all that we're here listening and receiving here today are things that each of us can take back to our universities to strengthen the initiatives that we have in place.
Thank you. And finally, we'll offer IUPUI an opportunity to talk about their opportunities. Hillary and Kalila.
Thanks. I would say our opportunity, all of our opportunities, it's learning, simply learning from each other. And, I also want to just premise that comment with saying, we're different. and I think we focus so much on our shared values and our similarities and our shared senses of what students need to learn about the world. But there are different approaches. We have different histories. We do have different different sort of scope of our work in some ways, or at least foci of that work. But we can celebrate that. We can take advantage of that, and we don't need to morph into each other, and so I think it's really, really critical for us to learn from each other. I can say that the Office of International Affairs at IUPUI has learned tons from this partnership, from partnering with our diversity, equity, and inclusion, partners and institutions, people, and units, and so it's really transformed us as an office, and it goes both ways. And Khalil has always pointed that out too. It goes both ways. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other piece here that I think Joanna talked about is our students. And so one of the things that I think is our greatest opportunity is really having students who are globally conscious and global citizens, and the work that we're able to do through our partnership by having a unified front, by going out to the campus collectively saying, hey, this is us, we're a team now, and these are the ways in which we want you to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and international affairs and education. And I think that's one of the strongest opportunities. Now we have wish lists of things, like we want to have those shared positions between our units. We have a desire to, do several things, but I think we've made some great starts in the last few years that we've been partnering together. Hillary Khan does sit on our Chancellor's Diversity Cabinet. And so she has a voice there and has an opportunity to hear about many of the things that are happening across the entire institution as it relates to DEI affairs. And so I think those are the ways in which, those are the opportunities that we will continue to build on using the relationship that we've already begun to construct.
Thank you so much for that response. And now we have time just for our last question for the panelists. And you've shared the power of relationships and building partnerships. You've shared the importance of building a strong foundation that goes beyond your partnership or your relationships, and the importance of speaking out in support of each other's work. So the last question, I'm going to read a few questions, and if you can just pick one of these questions, is one, what have you learned from each other? Or how have these partnerships transformed your institutions? Or what might be helpful for attendees as they follow this path towards seeking greater alignment of work in these two areas. And I would be remiss if I didn't add a reference to a question in the chat that mentioned, has this changed the way that you've engaged with international partners in terms of their understanding and preparation for working with our students and having an equity-minded perspective? So we'll start this time with FIU. So you can choose any one of those three for your last comments in this context.
That's unfair, Dawn. I want to answer all of them. Okay, I'll go quickly. What have I learned from Hillary Landorf? Oh my goodness. I can't even begin to tell you, and we're just scratching the surface. And so it's been a privilege, because when I tell you, when she extended herself and the work that they were doing to augment with the EAI, it literally changed my life. Guys, I'm not kidding. This is who I am. I tell you, this is the truth. So let me give you a for instance. Within our equity action proposal, we had outlined the benefits and impact of DEI in the classroom, okay? Global Learning had an initiative already in place to review course content for their GEO course design and instructional workshops. And when we recognized that we were both thinking the same thing, we married those efforts, and she committed to including DEI in the learning module for the Global Learning course design and their instructional workshops. That's huge, right? And that comes from relationship, that comes from engagement, that comes from removing, what do you call it? Just let me say this to the 300 people on this line, removing your ego, right? And receiving the help, right? And receiving the exchange for the greater good, because again, it's beyond all of us. Imagine, we talked about rearing our students to become global citizens. Well, that happens when they get the content that we can give them through pedagogy, and they can go out because they know more and they can engage in a better way. So I'll just stop right there, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'm delighted to have the honor to work with Hillary.
Well, I'm going to return the compliment. I've learned so much from EK. First, and you can see it on this Zoom call, positivity goes a long way. Second, EK, she doesn't say it, but she's in a C-suite. She's part of the upper administration at FIU. And I learned that to do this work, it's essential to get over my own imposter syndrome and be willing to knock on someone's door, even if they're vice president of human resources. I do want to say that the path for greater integration starts with listening to students' voices. We're here to serve students. They know what's going on. They know what they need to feel empowered. They know when they feel a sense of belonging from all of us. So we need to listen to them and heed their call.
Thank you. And next we'll go to IUPUI. So Kalila, Hillary.
I'd like to answer them all as well, but I'll focus on maybe one of them. You know, I do believe we are transforming IUPUI, but it's taking time and it's slow going. We're building trust, and you know, change takes time, and so I in many ways where I think I see more transformation is actually within our respective units, as I was speaking to earlier. I can, again, you know, we are really thinking about this partnership, not just as once in a while we connect and do something together or co-sponsor something together. So it's not just, you know, or we give them $500 for an event or whatever, even though we might do that or not, but I actually don't think we have. But nonetheless, this is not about transaction, this is about transformation. And it's not just transformation of the institution, but transformation of our relationship and of our respective offices. I know, you know, our strategic plan within our office now has a particular pillar dedicated to advancing social justice. And in many ways, we've expanded our own mission. You know, the breadth of our mission, I think, is much wider, and it's putting us in a position to have more significant impact on our campus, truly for all. Kalila, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I echo everything that you said. And I think the biggest thing for me is the just the value of our relationship and us working together and the impact that it's making on our campus. But we're so decentralized, but with us showing up together and with our other four, we are realizing that there's actually much more interest than I think either of us thought. And so that's really powerful too, to know that all across our entire campus there are people who do have a dedicated interest and passion for the work that we're doing, but perhaps they needed folks like us to sort of lead that charge. And so I think that is speaks to the beginning of our transformation on our campus.
Thank you. And then our last duo, Renetta and Joanna.
Renata is starting.
I will start. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Joanna. I want to circle back to something that Kalila said earlier when she talked about going to New Zealand and coming back with such passion and such interest, because that there's a piece of my story in there about how what I've learned from Joanna. So, whenever we go to another country, we take time, right? We take time to learn the culture ahead of time. We take time to learn in country. We take time to learn about the people, the history, the culture, to appreciate it, to honor the people, to honor their culture and their history, and to be able to bring that, I think, into a DEI context. Joanna has been doing that and has done that, not just her, but her entire staff on the DEI side. And for me, it has been important to, Joanna has helped me to keep that part of myself, that part that wants to be collegial, that part that wants to dig deep and take time and have tea or coffee and get to know people, and how can we talk about things. So for example, when the Afghanistan piece came up, it's interesting. Joanna was telling people, just tell people to talk to me, let's just have a conversation. And to even talk about transformation at a university. Our university is very large, over about 40,000 students. And sometimes that human side can get lost. And so bringing that back in and remembering that we need to have that connection, that we are citizens of the world, that we are different, that the diversity is good, that this is not a monolithic society, and that we need to take all of these different pieces together and work together and be able to come together in a special way. And there's nothing wrong with that. And just because we're in an organizational or institutional structure with walls, we can break down those walls and barriers. And I think that working with Joanna together and coming sort of from that global context, we've been able to try to move that forward. Joanna?
Well, so vice versa. We, because of the energy and commitment and vision, we have learned as a Global Affairs a lot from DEI. They have helped us to organize some workshops. We have created DEI Diversity Task Force in Global Affairs. We are creating a new position of Diversity Officer. All of this come from DEI office. So that integration is critical. So we're learning all the time from each other, nonstop. But I also wanted to give a shout out to all those people with whom we're working. So, I represent Global Affairs, but I have 70 people working on the staff. We have 40 or 50 or maybe 60 students working with us. Everyone brings a piece to that puzzle. People are working hard on developing the global learning outcomes. Nancy Erbstein, that was mentioned earlier, leading numbers of initiatives around the global education for all and her team. And I could go on and on and on and on. So we need to recognize that it is really many, many people who allows us to speak today with you and with the larger audience. And then one last thing. We're talking a lot about the students. We have to talk also about faculty. Faculty are critical piece and parcel of whatever we're doing. And each of our office actually spending tons of time on working directly with the faculty because they are the drivers of change. And the way they speak, talk, think, engage, and are active, They are stimulating conversation in the classroom. They are building the role models for the student. So there is this combination of all of us are working together. So thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. Thank you.
No, thank you all. What a rich conversation. And I really appreciated Hillary's statement about focusing on transformation versus transaction. And I know it resonated with many people. I saw it being repeated in the chat. So I would like you all to keep that in mind as we head into our next segment of the program. We will have a brief break as we transition into the breakout discussion rooms. And as a reminder, each of you has been assigned to a breakout discussion based on your responses to the questions that you answered during your registration. And there'll be a pop-up on your screen that invites you to join a specific breakout room. So just accept that and we'll get you to the right spot. This program will resume in about 3 minutes in the breakout rooms. And at the end, we will reconvene as a larger group and have some reflection and further commentary. Thank you all for such a rich discussion in my breakout room. I hope and I think the other breakout rooms were probably equally as active. I will ask each of the facilitators to give some brief updates on the discussions in their breakout rooms. And I'd like to begin with Aaron and Amber.
So to just debrief for a moment, we had a conversation around how much we learned about from the panel about building the trust and building on those relationships and the importance. We had conversations about the importance of understanding how the reciprocity of those relationships are important, so that one side of that relationship is not doing more work than the other, and the importance of understanding and back to I think what Joanna was talking about being able to speak on behalf of each other and how important that is. Amber gave great guidance about the importance of different groups on campus that could also help us in that work. As we were getting towards the very end, she was sharing some ideas of the importance of bringing students as the voice to the table. It was a great conversation that was unfortunately cut too short. We could probably kept going for quite some time.
Yes, I completely agree. Thank you, Aaron, for summarizing that so well.
Yes, I think our conversation could have kept going for a long time too. So I appreciate that we had an opportunity and encourage you all, if you want, here in the chat, you can continue contributing and adding some examples here while we debrief a little bit. Next, I'd invite Douglas and Dawn to reflect on the discussion in their breakout room.
Thanks so much, Dale. Well, really just didn't have enough time to finish our conversation. We had a group of people who were really interested to know how to start the conversation on campus and actually how to maybe break down some of those perceptions of diversity being a domestic agenda item. And so we just had a number of people kind of sharing some ideas about how that might happen, different ways of making that work, and really drawing on the panel discussions earlier on today about the wonderful kind of collaborative relationships that we've seen on those 3 campuses. And we were then talking about some of those initiatives that we have around maybe co-sponsoring an event, finding a way of actually starting the conversation, and some reflections there about not asking another office to do something without then giving something in return. So that was really the focus of our conversation. I think a real desire from people to actually reach out to others on campus, but sometimes finding the door a little bit closed. And so that was really the kind of focus of our conversation. A couple of us on the group were not in North America, so we had a bit of a conversation as well about how wonderful those of us outside of North America think it is to see this conversation, because it doesn't happen in the same way on campuses outside of the US. And so that opportunity that the US has for a global leadership role in this area, but recognizing that there are diverse understandings and definitions of diversity in different parts of the world. So again, that was, I think, a very quick summary on behalf of Dawn and myself.
Okay, and next, David and Tony.
Yeah, so we also could have probably gone for another hour at least, maybe. So we were talking about really what is the meeting point for this work, thinking about bringing together diversity and internationalization and any sort of practical tips or actions that people could point to. And we talked a lot about the relationship being important, which we heard many of our speakers refer to, and the need to respect colleagues, approach this work with humility. And I would say that's it's a two-way street, right? Balancing that, recognizing intersectionalities. Many times we have the same goals, but then we have different, maybe we speak a different language and we follow a different path, but we have the same destination in mind. There was one of our participants talked about how important it was getting the right person, having a new VP, and how sometimes a big win is just something like getting a question about international experiences on the campus climate survey. Allows for some further conversations. And then some of the practical suggestions beyond that was looking at participation rates for different programs, getting panels together, thinking about some of the programming that could occur to increase participation by various individuals who may be currently underrepresented in programs and services. Also developing not just developing a global diversity scholarship, but using it as an advocacy tool to demonstrate that perhaps the number of applications far exceeds the amount of funding available, and how there's that need that needs to be filled. There was a very practical example from a colleague in South Carolina talking about teaching fellows and preparing them to work with English language learners, which oftentimes they would find themselves in the classroom and perhaps even the teacher wouldn't quite know how to assist those students. And I want to see if Tony has any other thoughts there that he might have captured.
Well, of course, you're spot on, so I have nothing really to add, but I would say that one other thing that struck us as a conversation was that we all recognize the wonderful energy between our panelists in the larger conversation, and that's not normative, right? And so we did spend some time talking about what happens when there is not that beautiful personal chemistry where we're doing potlucks at each other's houses and stuff, and we're all fighting for limited resources to do our work, the work that's in our lanes and in our spaces. And so I think it was really, really important. I forgot who lifted that up. One of the breakout people is just to understand that it's not going to always be a natural progression. It's not going to always be a love fest, that these two sides of the house come together and work in some really award-winning way. And I think we'd be remiss not to recognize that and lift that up and say that out loud. And so that, I think that's one takeaway for me. That it's beautiful when it looks like the representatives of those three institutions from earlier at the top of the hour. But what do you do in the midst? What do you do when there's not that synergy? And how do you navigate and come together in these two lanes?
Yeah, thank you. That was a very important conversation. I happened to be in David and Tony's room, so had a chance to be part of that conversation. Next, Kelvin and Rebecca.
Thank you, Dale. And I think where Tony left off actually makes a perfect opening point for us, because that was our opening conversation, perhaps fittingly on the centennial anniversary of the publication of Joyce's Ulysses. We began with structures and how to subvert them, and whether or not having a CDO and an SIO sitting in different parts of an organization, or perhaps being unequal depending on where the reporting line is, might make that kind of interpersonal relationship unequal. And I think, as a number of the commentators in the room pointed out, along with our expert panelists, that we really just needed to be subversive, to knock on doors, to lead with the passion and foreground the passion, and not let those structures impede the kind of work that we wanted to do. We also discussed a little bit how perhaps sometimes the fit between integrating the work of internationalization and JEDI within the academic sphere might be more immediately apprehensible through courses, through learning outcomes and so on. But then perhaps, in other forms of sort of programming might be a little bit more challenging, especially when you think about resources and sort of competing priorities. And then I think one thing that we touched on from a number of different aspects was whether or not we needed to lean in more to the work being done by expert colleagues across the field, or in other offices, or in other types of institutions, rather than trying to sort of lead from the perspective of internationalization. And I think we sort of came to the conclusion that it really was a both and, that unless we really made this part of our work centrally, it would never become part of our work centrally. And so we couldn't just see it as something to contribute to, but that it needed to be very really our own. So I'll sort of pause there and let Rebecca fill in some more thoughts.
A great summary. Thank you, Calvin. I think that we did really have some strong themes of, yes, both and what are the structures, and are they serving us? Can we operate around them then when they are not serving us? And that it might not always be consistently a great structure that is helping you come together. And when it's not, what is your responsibility, and how can you continue to do the work and build connection where you can and in the ways that you can, and lift up voices and make sure that everyone's in the room as much as possible.
Thank you both. And finally, I invite Rick and Jakob to share some reflections on their room.
Thank you. I think it's really great to hear everyone else reporting back. We also had touched on a few things, so excuse us for repeating, but we also talked about how to begin the conversations, which I think is a really, really important reminder that even those of us who have self-identified or have been assigned to be more advanced in doing this work, we still need to always continue to learn and commit to this work. So that was actually a really useful reminder as well. We also discussed about the limited resources and how to share them, and how to work with campus partners so that we're able to have a seat at each other's tables. And I think, this is back to the earlier point about reciprocity. And we also discussed ways of not needing to reinvent the wheel, so supporting each other's initiatives, but also designing programming at the very outset with each other to have that same conversation. And I think we're all really struck that from the conversations that there's no one-size-fits-all model, that we are all coming from very different institutions and histories, and it's really important to be mindful and respectful of those histories as well as we learn from each other. Jakob, do you have anything else to add for that?
No, I think, Rick, you made an excellent summary. The only piece I want to add is that one of the questions we got was somebody saying, what do you do when you contact the DEI office and they tell you they're already doing everything and in a way they don't need your help? So it was really a challenging question. And the question is, how do you answer that? And like everybody indicated, I guess the piece is don't try to reinvent the wheel. Try to figure out what value added you can bring to that table so that when you invite the DI office to come work with you, it's going to be a win-win situation for both offices.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And thank you all for the comments that you've shared, the rich discussions that have occurred in the breakout discussions. And I just have to say that I just want to thank all of you for being here today and being a part of this conversation. We noted in our breakout room the liveliness of the chat and how we're all going to go back and pull some of those resources and materials. But I just have to say, as someone who has been working in this space and looking at this, it truly just warms my heart in a very significant way to see so many of us interested and engaged in this topic and really reimagining international education in a way that will truly involve all of our students. And I think this may be the most pressing issue, as Lenitra said, for our field. And I'm just so pleased to be a part of the conversation with you. And I look forward to the next conversation and the next steps as our field evolves.
Thank you, Dawn, and just everyone for participating in this program today, in listening to the panel discussion, the breakout discussions. I have a lot to think about in my role here at NAFSA. I know we've all learned a lot about the challenges and opportunities and even some strategies or techniques for moving this work forward at all levels to engage multiple audiences. To conclude our event, I would like to invite Dr. Esther Brimmer, the Executive Director and CEO of NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, to provide her remarks. Esther.
Well, first, thank you. This has just been such a rich conversation. It's been great to hear these interactions and to learn from everybody involved in the session today. So I want to extend deep thanks to our distinguished panel, to all of you who joined us today for this inspiring and important dialogue. Our speakers shared direct personal experiences of working together on campus. And I must say, judging by the chat, we exchanged lots of ideas as well throughout the afternoon. We at NAFSA are proud to be leading this discussion today on the intersection between international education and diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and believe that they are deeply intertwined. It could be argued, and many people today have talked about the idea that the very relevance and growth of our field will hinge on our ability to make real progress in making social justice and inclusion an integral to the purpose of international education, not just an ancillary outcome. Widening access to international education is an important objective now and in the future. Now, as next steps, I encourage all of you to be active partners with us in this pursuit. By taking the case studies we shared today and engaging with your institution's leaders on how they could enrich your work on your campus. By engaging with our current cohort of NAFSA RISE Fellows to foster more diversity in our profession. By amplifying our May announcement of the 2022 Award for Impact in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and learning about our inaugural winner, Gretchen Cook Anderson, to ensure that success in uplifting underrepresented communities is celebrated far and wide. By joining NAFSA's Connecting Our World advocacy community to push your lawmakers to pass policies that ensure a more diverse community of US undergraduates can study abroad, and a more diverse community of international students can enroll in our colleges and universities and stay after they graduate if they wish to, for the benefit of our workplaces, our economy, and communities. By joining us at our annual conference and expo in Denver this spring and diving deeper into these themes and others that define our field's sustainability and evolution. By exploring NAFSA's many resources that tackle these subjects in great depth and insight, including, of course, the Social Justice and International Education volume, edited by Lenitra, and with several of the authors who are here today as well, and available for purchase in NAFSA shop. Please review the bibliography of resources provided today and the NAFSA blog for additional suggestions. It's been really an exciting day. And with that, I will close today's program with my sincere appreciation for your commitment to helping build a more just, peaceful, and interconnected world. And I look forward to continuing this dynamic conversation. Thank you.